I had done a lot of cases in my career. I knew the right way to go about it. And we said to them, well, what do you have in mind? He said, just a little bit. And I believe his comment was 500 million to start.
The major victory, the arrest of the Mexican drug lord El Chapo, as he's called.
The world's most notorious drug lord was extradited to the United States,
revealing that he had worked with the feds to bring down the accused drug lord.
Welcome to Heroes Behind Headlines. Today's guest is my good friend and co-author Michael R. McGowan. Mike is a legend in the FBI. Nobody in the FBI has worked more undercover cases than him. Nobody. Only about 2% of FBI agents ever work more than one undercover case. Mike has worked 50. 50. Today we're going to talk about one of his most significant cases, which is when he infiltrated and took down the Sinaloa Cartel and its leader, the infamous El Chapo. Make no mistake about it, Mike is one of the most decorated and experienced special agents in FBI history, and he's today's hero behind the headlines. First, Mike, I would just like to ask you a little bit about your background. How did you get into this line of work?
I didn't have a choice. I came from a police family. My dad and my grandfather were police officers. I didn't know you could go into another profession, but from a very young age, I grew up around cops. That was, they were in my house. They would give me rides to sporting events. It was all I knew. So inevitably, I took a path into law enforcement. I was first a police officer. I was a street cop for a little less than 5 years. And during that time, I had been approached by an FBI agent who was interested in seeing if I was interested in the FBI, which I really hadn't given a lot of thought to. But I filled out the application. I loved being a street cop, so I really wasn't overly concerned with the application process. I just kept showing up when and where they told me to. And then one day a letter came in the mail, and I was off to Quantico. But it was something that I knew I was going to enter law enforcement literally from the age of 5 or 6 years old. It was just kind of the family business.
Mm-hmm. And you grew up in Boston, the Boston area?
I grew up outside of Boston. I come from believe it or not, a large Irish Catholic family, and where I come from, you pretty much grow up to be a cop, a fireman, or a criminal. And I chose cop.
Okay, good choice. Good choice. So can you tell us how long had you been in the FBI, and just a little bit about, how you got into undercover work?
Okay, so before we get to the Sinaloa Cartel case, I'll just explain that at that point, I had 22 years in the FBI. I was a undercover coordinator in the Boston division, which means you manage and coordinate all undercover activity. I was not a supervisor. I was not a manager. I was a street agent, but because of the unique nature of the undercover technique, the undercover coordinator is usually assigned to a experienced undercover agent. I had been doing undercover work at that point for, 15 years or so. And in 2009, when this case first started, not only was I the Boston undercover coordinator, but I was also assigned to a national undercover team that the FBI was running. I was the operations team leader, which meant that I literally set up the scenarios, assigned the undercovers. So again, at that point, 2009, undercover work was full-time. Very few people in the FBI work undercover full-time. I was fortunate enough to be one of them.
And what was your training in undercover work in the FBI?
My training was unlike today's FBI. There was no training when I started in the FBI. Now there's a very, very intense process if you're if you're interested in undercover work. There's a fallacy out there that every FBI agent works undercover. That's not true. Less than 10% of the agent population works undercover. So 1 out of 10 agents is what's called certified, which means you have to go through a vetting process, a testing process, a psychological process, and then you have to successfully complete a 2-week undercover school run by the FBI. That all started in the mid around 1994, 1995. I was in the FBI before that, working undercover, so I was grandfathered into the process. If you were already working undercover prior to the initiation of the formalized training. So when I learned through mistakes. I learned through trial and error. I went out there and did it. I had no idea what I was doing when I first started. I was horrible at it, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, you told a funny story about the first time you were sent out to, I think it was a mafia like hangout, right?
Yeah, that was the story where I was told to go in. My assignment was, well, first of all, I was selected because I had been a cop. In those days, the theory was that if you had been a cop before you were an agent, that you were a natural for an undercover work, which is ridiculous because it's the exact opposite. A police department is a very very structured, organized chain of command. But that was just the way the FBI did it in those days. So an agent approached me and I said, well, what's my assignment? And he said, well, go find out things. So that was the extent of my instruction. And I was given an assignment to go into a certain location, which I did. And the first time, as you know, I walked in, the entire place stopped talking, literally like a E.F. Hutton commercial. So that got off to a bad start. And I spent about 3 weeks going back and forth. I didn't look like them. I didn't dress like them. I didn't act like them. And then finally and kindly, a very elderly Italian gentleman grabbed me around the shoulder one night and basically said, kid, you're really nice, but what are you doing here? Get lost. So that was my entree into undercover work. I mean, I laugh about it now, but it was so ridiculous at the time. And now we don't put our agent.
Dangerous to just kind of throw a kid into, with no training, into a lion's den, so to speak.
Right. And I also think I mentioned to you another time, one of my first undercover drug buys, when I went to buy the drugs, the seller just stopped and said, sorry, officer, we're out of dope tonight. So I was 0 for 2 starting out. And again, I chuckle about it, but I really caught the bug because it really is, it's a fascinating technique. It's very, very interesting. It's basically, as you get to understand it and as you get to apply it and practice it, it's basically a psychological chess match with bad guys. I train undercover agents now, and what I tell them is, you have to convince a bad guy that you're as bad, if not worse than him or her, and you're an FBI agent. So it's not easy.
Right.
In court, when I've testified as an undercover, the defense lawyers will always start their first question, well, you spent your whole case lying to my client. And your answer is, yes, sir, I lied to him every day. It doesn't usually work well if you tell him you're an FBI agent. And the jury understands that. You're living.
Yeah.
You present yourself and you testify as a professional witness. But when you're in that role, you're one of them.
Can you tell us how the El Chapo case started and how you got involved?
So in 2009, as I mentioned, I was the undercover coordinator in Boston. I was also part of that national undercover team. So I was flat out. I was working probably a dozen undercover operations, if not more. And there was a young agent in the Boston division that came to see me, and he was literally a baby. He was I think he had 2 or 3 years in the FBI total. And he kind of hung his head outside my office, peeking in. And finally I said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "Listen, I am working with an informant, and I think I have something, and I was told to come see you because you could come up with something devious." So that's how the conversation started. And I said, "What do you got?" And I kind of was half listening to him. I really wasn't devoting full attention. I had a lot of stuff on my plate. And he started to tell me that he had developed an informant who had been in prison prior, who was now out of prison, but had been in prison um, with members of the Sinaloa Cartel. And as soon as he mentioned the Sinaloa Cartel, at that time in 2009, the Sinaloa Cartel was the most powerful drug organization in the world.
The Sinaloa Cartel had been founded in the late 60s in the Mexican state of Sinaloa, and according to the U.S. Justice Department, had been responsible for importing more than 200 tons of cocaine and heroin into the United States. It also supplied the United States and other markets with massive amounts of methamphetamine, marijuana, and MDMA. Nobody knows exactly what the revenue of the Sinaloa Cartel is, but it's estimated that in 2009, it was around $40 billion a year. To put that into perspective, that's equal to the worldwide sales of the Coca-Cola Company. Since the mid-90s, the cartel had been run by pint-sized drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman Lorca, commonly known as El Chapo, or Shorty. Born the son of a poor cattle rancher, he was now worth billions and ranked by Forbes magazine as the 41st most powerful person in the world, ahead of Steve Jobs.
And he was the world's most wanted fugitive at that time, too. He had escaped from a prison in Mexico, and he fled into the Mexican mountains. And for whatever reason, the Mexican government wasn't about to go get him. So I remember this like it was yesterday. I literally felt, a rush that if we had a chance to make a case against the Sinaloa Cartel, because being in Boston is not a distribution center or a core, it's just a little city in America. But as I explained to the young man, and he's now a good friend of mine, and he's also now an undercover agent. But at the time I explained to him, these prison relationships are critical. When people go to prison, who they meet, relationships develop inside. They're like gold. It's like getting your PhD in crime when they go to these prisons. So I wanted to interview his informant and see if the guy was the real deal or not. And so the first thing we did was to go interview the informant. And he was the real deal. He had been in federal prison for 17 years. He had been intimately involved with the Pablo Escobar group out of Medellin, Colombia, back in the day. And like most good informants, he had a massive ego. He was always the smartest guy in the room, which is kind of surprising if you spent 17 years in federal prison. But the point is, they're a breed apart. So not only when the young agent came to me, but then I met the informant, I thought we had a chance if we set it up right.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about the way you met the informant and the way you kind of handled him? I thought was very, very interesting.
Well, what happened at the time, and you got to remember, and I want to make it clear to your audience, this stuff you learn by trial and error. And I probably have made more mistakes as an undercover agent than anyone else in the FBI's history. But you learn each time you make a mistake. So I had been dealing with informants for many, many years. That's how I was introduced in one of my first undercover cases. I learned how to be an undercover, not by an FBI agent. I learned by a criminal. So getting to this informant, the very first time I met him, the other agents were there. They were all in their blue jeans and their casual clothing. I came in with a very expensive suit, dressed up, and I sat intentionally. I sat to the side of him so he couldn't make direct eye contact with me. And for 2 hours, I just listened, never said a word, never asked a question. I wanted to hear him, and I wanted to unnerve him, which it did, because as soon as I left the room, he made a comment that I can't repeat on the air, but he basically asked the case agent who this guy was. And we ended up becoming very close. He did a phenomenal job for us. And people think all the time they hear the word informant, that somebody can, inform on others. Everyone has a choice in life. The FBI wouldn't exist without informants. So you need to have you can never trust them 100%, nor did I ever trust him 100%, but they can get you into places that FBI agents can't get into. So for the next 3 years with the case agent, we spent thousands and thousands of hours planning this case.
And what was the informant's nationality?
He was I believe he was Cuban, or he was from Cuba originally. He was of Spanish descent, but he was very educated, not in academic settings, although I think he was a college graduate. But he could put together like financial deals in 10 seconds. He was very, very savvy.
Wow.
Because he had been dealing with the Escobars and the Sinaloa Cartel. And again, people...
Yeah, so he'd been doing this for a long time.
People think, these guys are, they're not well educated. They may not be well educated academically, but streetwise and dope-wise, they're brilliant.
Informants are key in making undercover cases. They're usually the way into the criminal organization. The informant in this case, Vargas, had a long criminal resume which included working with Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel. He was also in possession of a massive ego. Despite the fact that he had been arrested twice and had served a total of 17 years in federal prison, he considered himself a major player in the drug world. Although the case depended on Vargas, the informant, Mike knew he had to watch him like a hawk for any sign of betrayal. He knew that if any point during the case Vargas thought he could make a better deal for himself on the other side of the fence, he wouldn't hesitate to jump, and all the undercovers, including Mike, could be killed.
And again, believe me, we had our differences and we had our blowouts, but you're literally trusting these people with your lives. He knew that we were agents. He was going to introduce us to the Sinaloa Cartel. So, we need to form a trust relationship that allows all of us to wake up and go to work the next day. So he was, and I've said this before, when the Sinaloa Cartel case was over, I personally got a lot of credit and attaboys for that case. And I tell everybody who listens, if not for the informant and not for the other 3 undercover agents who I worked with, the case never would have been made. So I was just like, I tell people, I was like Mariano Rivera. I just came in the 9th inning to clean it up. The informant and the 3 other undercovers really made the case.
So now you've met the informant. How do you proceed? I'm sure you did like an evaluation at that point to decide, okay, this guy is somebody I can work with. And then what was the plan from there?
Again, at that point, I had a lot of experience. So I knew that if we were actually going to take a run at the Sinaloa Cartel, we had one shot at it. It had to be perfect. So you needed the right personnel. You needed the right manpower. You needed the right plan. And I also knew I had worked dope all my life. I broke into the FBI working Escobar and the Medellin Cartel. I was in Philadelphia. I wasn't in Medellin, but our squad was named the Colombian Dope Squad. You couldn't use that anymore, but we were targeting Colombians and Escobar. So I also knew that the Sinaloa Cartel would never have anything to do with us if we were connected to the United States. All right? The only thing the cartels in Mexico worry about is the FBI or DEA grabbing them because they know we lock up dope dealers. So in this case, I came up with a plan that we had to be a criminal organization that had no nexus to the United States. So we eventually decided, because of the personnel we had, we were going to be a Sicilian-based crime organization that was looking to import cocaine and heroin from Mexico into Europe. And that's the way we instructed the informant to go back to them and explain, hey, I'm working with this group in Europe. Here's what there's about, but they have nothing to do with the United States. And that was a critical decision early on that I believe resulted in why the case was successful at the end.
So he goes to Mexico. He makes contact with his contacts within the Sinaloa Cartel.
Right. Yes, we as agents, we cannot travel into Mexico. Legally, that's not permissible for obvious reasons. But we can send informants into Mexico. So he was sent into Mexico, I believe, 4 or 5 times. But after the second meeting, he had done so well that he was instructed to come back to meet directly with Chapo. And that's what he did. So once we had that, we figured again, any day this case could blow up, but we just kept pushing ahead. And again, the informant was critical by basically putting the two groups together. So he went into Mexico at high risk. He was on his own. We couldn't follow him. We couldn't protect him. So he'd go into Mexico for, 4, 5, 6 days at a time. And hopefully he came out every time, and he did. And eventually he put the two groups together. He convinced Chapo that this European group was interested in setting up an arrangement.
Was there a name for the European group, or he was just saying a European crime?
The Italians. We were supposed to be Sicilian, so he just referred to us as the Italians.
Okay, another question. When he was in Mexico, did you have any contact with him? Did you have any way to monitor what he was saying?
And that's why I give him a lot of credit. He went in there, no FBI assistance, no U.S. government assistance. He went up into the mountains to meet with Chapo. He was escorted by Mexican military personnel. Very, very dangerous game. Not a game. I shouldn't even call it a game. Very dangerous assignment.
Right. And had he met Chapo before?
No. In those 2 meetings when he met with the underlings in Mexico, he was convincing enough. And this is where the credibility from the 17 years in federal prison, he can throw around the right names. Okay, so he was the real deal is the best way to describe it. He was a Class A criminal, and luckily he was working for us at the time.
Wow. And what was the arrangement with him? What was he going to get out of this? Reduced?
Again, it's a very odd story, but when he was arrested the last time before he went to federal prison, under the U.S. government forfeiture laws, the government seized a bunch of his properties, which included some properties that belonged or were used by family members. And all he wanted was to get those properties back. So his incentive to cooperate was literally to, I guess, take care of his family with these properties. So, and
these were properties in the United States.
In the United States that the U.S. government had seized. And eventually, because he performed well, those properties were eventually returned to him.
Wow. So he makes 3 or 4 trips into Mexico, and he arranges for the Italian gang to meet with the Sinaloa Cartel. Is that correct?
Yes, and we had, you got to understand, when you have an informant, as good as an informant he was, you have to instruct them so that they know ABC. You have to tell them this, this, and this, and you got to stick to the script. So smartly, when they said, we'd like to connect with the Italians, he says, hey, you got to talk to them directly. I don't represent them. I'm just trying to make a buck here putting people together. Right. So he arranged that the only way the negotiations would occur would be directly with the Italians, which is what we wanted, obviously, because we had a team ready to go if and when we were able to meet them. And the reason we went with the Sicilian is we had an undercover agent on the East Coast that spoke Sicilian, had worked international undercovers, and would be perfect for the role. So we lined up.
As the leader of the gang.
Yeah. We lined up. Yeah. It took us 6 to 12 months to get our ducks in a row because we knew they'd check us eventually. They have attorneys. They have private investigators. we were going to be vetted at some point. So that takes a little time to set up. So we went to our friends in law enforcement overseas and basically created this group. And if anybody were to check, we appeared to be legitimate.
So you had to talk to European law enforcement so that if the Sinaloa Cartel checked, they could back it up.
There's something
that this group existed.
Yes, there's something in law enforcement undercover work called backstopping,
Mm-hmm.
which means you have to create a persona, either an individual or business persona, that will withstand scrutiny. It's very complicated. I'm not going to reveal the tradecraft involved, but they're going to check on you. You can't be a bad guy and tell somebody, hey, I'm so-and-so, or I want to do 20 tons of dope. They vet it just like a business person would. So we had to go around the world, literally, and set this up because, as I said at the beginning, we had one shot at these guys. One mistake and we were done.
So you had to establish that this group had a history.
Had a history. Right. The names were known internationally. We have for instance, we did a lot of work with the Spanish National Police. We did a lot of work with the Italian National Police. We were all over the world. And the FBI supported us because we literally were going after the top drug organization in the world.
Okay, so your informant arranges this meeting. I believe it was supposed to take place the first meeting took place in February of 2010. Is that
2010,
right?
Correct. Because it took us about a year to set it up. Yeah.
Okay. And you want to describe your team that was going to meet with the Sinaloa Cartel?
Right. So like I said, for about a year, we were setting this up. And my job was to basically be the puppet master behind the scenes, pulling the undercover strings. And I knew exactly who I wanted to be working and what their roles would be. Mm-hmm. So I took 3 undercovers, 2 from the national team that I worked with, and 1 from Boston, and another one from an East Coast city. So I had 4 undercovers lined up. And the Sicilian speaker was going to be the boss, El Jefe. And he was perfect for the role. We're meeting them in, as you said, February of 2010. Right around Christmas of 2009, my good friend, the Sicilian, was offered a private sector job in retirement and retired from the FBI. Apologized profusely, but, I wished him well. And but he got pulled out of us at the last minute. So we had to, overcome and adapt and adjust, and we did. And ironically, I ended up selecting myself to replace him. And even though I don't speak Sicilian or Italian or Spanish and sometimes struggle with English, I knew that I could do the role.
Yeah.
You basically had 20, 25 years of undercover experience.
Right.
To the FBI, this was like our Super Bowl.
At this point in his career, Mike was a veteran of undercover work. He had infiltrated the Russian mob, 3 Italian mafia families, and a major Pakistani heroin importer. Undercovers choose roles that they're familiar with. For this job, Mike used the cover of an irascible Italian mob boss named El Viejo, the old man. He was familiar with this role because of his dealings over the years infiltrating Italian crime families, so he knew the character well.
So with the other 3 undercovers and myself and the informant and the case team, the young agent who was helped by other senior agents, we probably had 10, 15 guys assigned to the case, and it literally was an all-star team. It was a very, very competent, experienced, successful team, which was the only way we could have attacked this group.
So you arranged to meet where?
And again, we set up our organization. We mirrored the Sinaloa Cartel. We knew how they were structured, who was in charge, how they did things. We basically did the same thing.
Yeah.
So the first meeting, now they knew that we were from Europe, and we invited them to Europe initially hoping that they wouldn't accept. And then we said, you know what? The cops watch us over here all the time.
Yeah.
So let's meet somewhere neutral and just have a vacation. Let's meet in the States. So that's how we snuck back in, because we had to establish what's called venue. in order to prosecute crimes in the United States, crimes have to be committed within the United States.
Got it.
So they were very appreciative that we told them, don't come to our homes because the cops are going to
Right.
identify you.
Right. They're watching us all the time.
So we'll go to Miami. No one knows you in Miami. We'll go to Miami. So we set up this meeting in Miami for the initial meeting, which is, again, that February 2010. Yeah. So that meeting, and you got to understand, there was a tremendous amount of pressure. I can laugh and joke. I'm retired now and all that. But at the time, the FBI was like high strung. This was like a big deal. All right. So there was a lot of pressure on us to perform and to succeed. We set up this meeting. The four of us, the four undercovers go. I brought in a female undercover to help us. We set up this operation in a high-rise condo right on the Atlantic Ocean. Beautiful view, etc. And when we were preparing, and right as the Sinaloa representative was coming to meet us, I noticed that the atmosphere was very tense and stressful. And I had worked with these other three guys all my career, and they're very, very funny guys. They're very, very accomplished guys, but everybody was kind of uptight. And I just thought, as the team leader, it was my job to kind of break the ice. So I was originally dressed in a very expensive suit, jewelry, and blah, blah, blah. But I had noticed that in the bathroom, there was a purple velour bathrobe. So with the cameras running, I took off the nice suit and I put on the bathrobe and came out, and it completely busted the whole thing open. Everybody started to relax. And again, we later found out that the representative went back to Chapo and said, hey, the boss didn't even get dressed up. He's marching around in a bathrobe. And the prosecutors later, when we went to court, the prosecutors always referred to that meeting, not the first meeting. They always referred to it as the bathrobe meeting. So, it's humorous, but it broke the ice. And it just showed the Sinaloa Cartel that, these guys they're the real deal. They don't even get dressed up for these things.
Right. They don't really, they don't bother.
So we spent that first day, we spent 4 hours negotiating with them.
Yeah.
When I say them, they had sent somebody named Manuel Gutierrez Guzman, who was the first cousin of Chapo. He was their spokesman. And, we hit it off from that first day, and we were talking crazy amounts of dope within the first hour.
Amazing. So you come out in a bathrobe. I remember you told me your hair was slicked back.
Came out in the bathrobe.
You were kind of like going around like you want a pet piece of me, like this kind of stuff.
I had a little fun with it. It's on video, but no one's ever going to see that. But what happened was I was supposed to be the equivalent of Chapo. I'm the head of this Sicilian organization now. So I'm going to act like Chapo would act, which is you don't get into the nuts and bolts of the meeting. I took the pretty undercover, and we went out and sat on the deck and got a tan and had a couple of drinks. And whenever something important would happen, one of the undercovers would come out, whisper in my ear, I'd whisper back. I paid Manuel no attention.
Yeah.
And again, people, probably think I'm sound crazy. This stuff works. I've done it forever. And you just don't walk up to a dope dealer from the Sinaloa Cartel in 5 minutes and tell him you're deep in darkest circus. I wouldn't even speak to him.
So you're out taking a tan with your girlfriend
and having a drink
on the balcony
on the 30th floor.
Right. That's funny.
Yep. Had a nice tan. Got a nice tan.
This meeting was incredibly important. The FBI had to convince members of the Sinaloa Cartel, who were highly suspicious, that the people they were dealing with were really Italian criminals. Mike was their leader. So Mike led the way as El Viejo. Now, Mike is not a trained actor, but like a great actor, he inhabited this bold and flamboyant character, strutting around the room in a colorful silk robe and shouting orders to his minions. And he pulled it off.
And when I told Washington we had a chance to meet the Sinaloa Cartel, they were like, meet them next week. And I'm, no, I'm dead serious. And I was like,
Yeah.
I said, we can't meet them for maybe a year. And
Yeah.
they're like, what are you talking about? But the boots on the ground that do this thing regularly, we understand these, but sometimes the people in position of authority and supervision haven't done it before. So they think this stuff just like happens magically.
Right.
It doesn't.
Right. No, you have to look. Yeah. You have to look like who you're pretending to be at every moment. Right. So you can't be dressed.
When you do this stuff, and I've taught people this all the time, from the second I walk out of my house where I really live, from that second on, I'm that other person. I'm that undercover persona, and I have to expect I'm being followed, I'm being watched. If you don't have that mindset, something bad's going to happen. All right.
Yeah.
I think, Ralph, you and I talked about it. There's a bridge outside of Boston that when I hit this bridge, I become that other person. I have to. All right. And now that I'm retired, it's so much nicer not to have to be two people.
Yeah.
But when you're doing, the Sinaloa Cartel, it really is a psychological challenge.
Right.
Okay. Now, if we act, think, dress, talk like cops,
you're going to.
We'll never see them
away.
again.
Right. Of course.
So you got this clown out with a bathrobe on,
right. His hair slicked
having
back.
a cocktail in the middle of the day. Well,
right.
I don't know who these guys are, but they're not FBI agents. I can tell you that.
And she was in a bikini. I
she was.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you wouldn't expect to see an FBI agent in a bikini either.
No.
Yeah, that's funny. Wow.
And this all came out later in court, and I was testifying to some of this, and the jury was literally laughing. It was a very serious, process, but they were like, wow, I didn't know. I thought like Efren Zimbalist Jr. did this stuff. I didn't know these guys wore bathrobes and strutted around. So we set it up the right way. And I had told them that I was bringing my guys to relax and vacation.
Yeah.
So we took them out to dinner. We went out dancing, just doing the necessary things.
So the meeting kind of was serious business, and then you entertained them afterwards.
Right. When you're an undercover agent, people think you're talking what we call dirty, you're talking criminal nonstop. You're not. You have to spend hours and hours. It's just like gaining friendship or dating. You have to establish a relationship with the other people.
Yeah.
So you do natural things. You go out to dinner, you go out for drinks. You want them to like you. Okay.
And get a sense of who you are, which is actually a false sense. Right. Yeah.
And I tell people, when I do my training, and it was pretty much the same with the Sinaloa, but I did a lot of organized crime undercover work, the wise guys, the mafia, blah, blah, blah. And with those guys, they want to talk about criminal activity the least amount of time as possible.
Yeah.
So you could be with somebody for 2-4 hours, and you might get 3 minutes of dirty talk. Well, you have to fill the time with something else. You can't be a doofus, or you can't be, you got to talk about something you like, sports, hobbies, whatever. But you got to be engaged for these guys, because at the end of the day, they want to do business with you.
Yeah. Okay. So you have that initial meeting in February of 2010, and with Chapo's first cousin, and then what happens?
Well, again, when we had to get used to this in the case, we would have these meetings, and then they would obviously go back to Mexico, or he would go back to Mexico, and we had to wait weeks or months before we could find out the next step. It wasn't like we were meeting with these guys around the corner every day. So we would meet with Manuel. He would go back to Mexico. They were very disciplined about phone conversations. They wouldn't talk on the phone hardly at all, other than to, have arranged logistics. So when we left a meeting, we never knew if we would have another meeting until we got a response from Mexico.
Right.
So that February
so
meeting,
go back into the mountains, sit down with Chapo.
Yeah. Everything's
and
face to face.
right,
And, the informant, we can't, it's too dangerous to send the informant in there like over and over again. So we established communications with them. We established a system where basically they would call us at a certain date and time if things were going well. And there were times we didn't hear from them and we were like, are we done? We didn't know. And then the phone would ring and we were back on. So it
right,
just, most FBI undercover operations take place within the continental United States, and there's regular contact, daily or weekly contact. Here we had to, that's why you had to hit a home run each meeting in order to get them to come back.
So how long does it take before you hear anything from them?
Again, I may not remember the exact specifics, but we knew within a brief period of time, I would say weeks,
Mm-hmm.
that Manuel was impressed with us, that
Mm-hmm.
he told them, these guys are the real deal. And he did. We found out later that he told them the boss was in his bathrobe. He didn't even get dressed up for this meeting. That's how. And you laugh. Everybody laughs about that, but that's something I stress in training.
Mm-hmm.
You're hearing that from the horse's mouth. You got Chapo Guzman being convinced that the FBI is really a Sicilian crime organization. So that's a big deal. And when we got word back that he was impressed with us, we knew that we were going to move forward. We had to strategically plan and prepare for each meeting. We couldn't waste any meetings.
Right.
So Manuel would come back, and then he would slowly start bringing other people.
Yeah.
At one point, they invited us.
I think the next meeting was in the Virgin Islands, correct? Yeah.
Yep. So there's like 3 months in between the physical meetings. Now we're talking to them cryptically on the phone, but it's never dirty talk for being intercepted. So, it's like a boxing match. They're feeling us out. We're feeling them out. We were prepared to continue on. And the next meetings were the Virgin Island meetings. And again, we're trying to mirror their organization. So I'm taking my guys on vacation. Like when they believe we're in Europe,
Yeah.
we're hustling. We're really, so when it's time to relax, we want to go away from where the cops are.
Yeah.
And relax and enjoy the time. So we were happy to meet them in the Virgin Islands. And I believe they brought at least one other, if not two guys.
Yep. His personal
Mendoza, I think it was.
Mendoza came, his personal representative.
Yeah. So they come this time, and again, our job is to sell them that we're the real deal. And this is what I emphasize, and I hope they're listening. The other three undercovers have to carry the ball. I just come in periodically as the boss. So they have to go out to dinner. They have to go to the beach. They have to go out drinking with these guys. But again, with each meeting, if we hear back from them and they want to meet again, means we're making progress.
Right.
So,
and and the business end of it is you're talking amounts of cocaine and heroin that Chapo would import into Europe. Is that correct?
Yes, because we knew anybody in law enforcement knows at that time they had a stronghold on the United States.
Yeah.
They flooded our country with all kinds of dope,
Right.
but they didn't have a strong presence in Europe. That's what we tried to take advantage of. And when we floated we called it the pipeline. We wanted to establish a pipeline between Mexico and Europe. It melded into what their business model was at the time.
Right. So you were going to basically be their distributor in Europe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So again, planning or preparation, by having that seem to come out of nowhere, well, it took us 6 months to decide that.
Right.
But,
and what kind of quantities were you were they?
They were crazy quantities in that Miami February meeting. They opened up with they could give us 20 tons.
Now, to understand the scale of this request, 20 tons of cocaine laid out in kilo bricks would almost cover a football field, end zone to end zone. and be worth over $1 billion.
And if
Yeah.
we had said yes, they would have said, "Thanks, officer. I'll see you around."
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So this is
Right.
that tap dance, the psychological chess match. We looked at them like they were crazy. Nobody does 20 tons right off the bat.
Right off the bat. Yeah.
So
yeah.
we had to negotiate, and we wanted only 1,000 to 1,500 kilos, which is a hell of a lot of dope, but it's a very small quantity in the big picture. But we have to act unlike cops.
Right. So you have to act like a criminal organization.
Right.
Give us a smaller amount, and we'll test it. And
Let's see how each side handles it.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And
Right.
we bent over backwards. We were very respectful, but we weren't like overwhelmed that we were dealing with Chapo. All right. I even told Manuel at one point, "Your guy's stuck with a warrant over his head. I can move anywhere in the world. Your guy's stuck in the mountains." All right.
Yeah.
Which is true. He was limited in what he could do because he couldn't leave Mexico. So that's why Manuel had to come to Europe and the United States to meet with us. But he was Manuel was. We ended up calling Manuel the telephone. That's how the messages were exchanged.
And all during this time, you're also having to deal with the FBI brass, right? So what is their take? Are they pleased with your progress? Are they pushing you to move faster? Like what was that?
You have to understand, because the case was out of Boston, which was unusual, we were supervised by people in Boston. And they, all of whom were excellent bosses. Now, FBI headquarters in Washington obviously has overall authority and overall oversight, but we used our bosses in Boston to kind of keep them off our backs so we could work.
Right.
And
right.
that's not, I'm not disparaging anybody, but when you're doing something like this and you're involved in the day-to-day planning, preparation, meetings, you can't spend your whole day on the phone with Washington explaining yourself. So
right. And having them second guess everything.
So because of who the targets were, because of our initial successes, we were able to kind of move forward without too much crap, for lack of a better term. Every FBI investigation is monitored. Everybody has to deal with Washington. It's just the way it is. But we had great bosses in Boston who allowed us, and I remember distinctly my direct boss saying, "Give me all the paperwork. I'll take care of that. You go do what you got to do."
That's great.
So we were protected, if that's the right word, by our by our management.
They were running interference for you. Yeah.
Later in the case, headquarters started to tighten the noose, but after these first initial meetings, we were supported very well. So after the Virgin Islands meeting, they went back. We had to wait to see if we were still in the game. Whatever we did was impressive enough that they came back to us. The next series of meetings took place in Florida, and they brought financial people and legal people. So we knew that we were dealing with I used to refer to it as their executive level board or their management board. They brought serious legal people, serious financial people, because think about it. If you take away the illegal aspect of it, cocaine and heroin, if you have two conglomerates trying to do a deal in Europe, one's in Mexico, you're going to send your top people to work a deal out.
And these were very capable people.
Very educated, very well spoken, very well dressed, very impressive people. If they ever devoted the same level of interest to legitimate work, they'd probably be very successful. They're not stupid people, believe me.
Right.
So we had these financial and these it was mainly financial. And that's when, because I was running that national team, I had access to all the undercovers around the country. So I brought in guys who were very skilled in financial and money laundering. So just as we were meeting new people, I was introducing new people to them. So they didn't see the same four faces every time. And there were many meetings where they would see me maybe through a window or sitting out in a car, and I didn't even come into the meeting. That's what I have people working for me to do, just as Chapo had. I basically was Chapo for us, so I would send my attorney, I would send my legal guy. And again, we had exceptional undercover agents working this case. There were no there were no rookies or sloppy undercovers working this. They were the best the FBI had to offer.
So in that meeting in Florida in August, the money laundering came up.
Right.
Do you remember?
Yeah,
the details
we
of
had
that?
a function, again, a social function. It's not always business, but business inevitably comes up. And I believe that it was the attorney who approached one of our guys, I believe it was Patricio, and began to discuss money laundering. And he asked them how much they were talking about, because money laundering inevitably goes hand in hand with drug trafficking. I had done a lot of money laundering cases in my career. I knew the right way to go about it. And we said to them, well, what do you think, and what do you have in mind? He said, just a little bit. And I believe his comment was 500 million to start. All right.
Just a little bit.
And one of the problems with the Mexican cartels is exactly that. They make so much cash money, it's very difficult to clean up. I mean, they literally have, we've seen them, they literally have underground tunnels that are stuffed full of U.S. cash that they literally can't get rid of. They put them in wheelbarrows or small trains to transport. There's just that much cash hanging around.
Yeah.
So what that told me when they approached us about that, we eventually told them, yeah, we'll launder your money later. We want to do the dope first. But what that told me was, we were in solid. If they're asking us to launder their funds, they're going to give you X amount of dollars and trust you to return a percentage of that. That you don't do that unless you're in tight.
Right.
So, these are all positive signs.
So your credibility with them was very, very high.
Yes, and again, we told them no.
Yeah.
What cops are going to turn down laundering money?
Right.
And I literally had to go to Washington and explain our position where we didn't want to do it, because if we started to go down the money laundering path, we would have got away from the drug trafficking. If we were going to prosecute these people on drug trafficking charges, we needed to have actual drugs in our possession.
Right.
So the money was kind of it was exciting, and it didn't justify all the time and energy we had set up to do the case.
So, and then I think the next meeting was in Spain in 2011.
That's right. We went to Madrid.
And I think that's the point where you had contact with Chapo. Is that correct? Or
we were trying to arrange
earlier.
When we were in the Virgin Islands. Mendoza called Chapo, and Chapo was on the phone with us in the Virgin Islands. And Patricio and Antonio, two of our undercovers, obviously were Spanish speakers. I wasn't going to get on the phone because I don't speak Spanish. And they got on the phone with him and had a conversation. And, he basically said, hey, tell Viejo, I'm looking forward to this. He had bought it. He just tells us, hope things are going to work out. Hope we have a long relationship. So they talked to him in the Virgin Islands. When we went to Spain, I was supposed to speak directly to him because he was now introducing us to his people, his traffickers who were in Europe. Okay, so all of this is leading to, we're going to do this exchange.
Yeah.
But you need to meet our people. They need to meet. And we were being vetted every time. We knew that they were watching us.
Right.
So, it was a cat and mouse game.
Yeah. Yeah. So you go to Spain, and I think that's where you started to discuss drugs and test loads, correct?
Right. At that point, we had now spent more than a year, I believe, pushing this. And again, because you got to understand it, if you're talking about a large quantity transaction, either by vessel or by air, the details involved in that are incredible. This isn't something you can work out in an hour. And especially given, the back and forth, they had to go into the mountains, come back to us. It took a long time, but we were patient. And at this point, we now started to talk specifics.
Mm-hmm.
We were going to get X amount of dope. We talked about using cargo planes, vessels, etc. How much we had to now you got to remember, we also can't, if we get 1,000 kilos of cocaine, we can't pay for it. The U.S. taxpayer is not going to give the FBI millions and millions of dollars. So we had to be creative, and we told them, hey, rather than paying you for it, we'll offload it for you. We'll get rid of it for you, and we'll take 20% of the load as our payment. That way we don't have to give them any cash, and we find out where all their dope is going. So these are the negotiations that go on for like weeks, months. Now we're into a year.
So you're negotiating percentages, you're negotiating terms.
Right. And when I say this is getting back to the 3 undercovers. That was their primary job. And I would just come in and clean it up. An interesting thing I remember about Spain was when I went into the meetings, the other undercovers and the informant had prepared these guys so well. They stood up when I walked in like I was the president of the United States. Okay, but that's, again, this is what I teach in training.
Yeah.
They were Pavlov's dogs because of the way the scenario had been set up. So they knew that when I walked in the room, business is at
You're the jefe. You're the jefes here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a video from Spain that we played at trial where they all jump up. It looked like, the United Nations when I walked in the room.
Yeah.
But that's just the way they had been prepared.
Yeah.
And Spain was successful. The Spanish National Police were great. They allowed us access to a private airstrip. We were trying to lure Chapo out of Mexico. And we did a scenario where I took Manuel to this private airfield. I met with all the generals as if I controlled the airport. And we offered the opportunity for Chapo to flee to Europe.
Yeah.
And again, we find out a lot of things you find out after the investigation. We found out that he was seriously considering that. We had hoped he had jumped on a plane, but that was the type of cooperation we got from the foreign law enforcement. So this was a worldwide effort. The FBI was leading the show, but we got great help from Italy, from Spain, from England. We got help from everywhere.
Mm-hmm. So you decide to not use the airstrip.
That was a decision that they made.
Yeah. And what did they come back with in terms of an alternative?
This was, a kind of a secondary goal was to try to get him out of Mexico. So that's what the airfield was about. The dope deal.
So you can arrest him.
Yeah. If he felt so much pressure in Mexico, he had to flee. Well, he had to go somewhere. So we just gave them the opportunity to come to Europe if he ever chose to. He eventually did not, but it was a serious consideration, we found out later. We're still focused on our drug exchange, and it's during those meetings in Madrid that they commit to start sending us drugs that summer. And that leads to the test loads that you're familiar with. For people who aren't educated in drug trafficking, you can't send a container from point A to point B with no previous relationship without customs, whatever country it is. The customs people are going to search that vessel. So we had to do some test loads. We only wanted it to be 1 or 2 test loads. They ended up, over that summer, doing, I think it was 4 or 5. And we were getting a little bit aggravated because it takes time, money, etc. They were being careful. We understood that. But at the same, this is really when Washington started to get a little bit antsy.
Mm-hmm.
We had now been working these guys for a couple of years, and we had great conversations. We had a great conspiracy, but we didn't have any actual drugs.
Right. And without drugs, you don't have any real evidence.
You can charge people with drug trafficking charges without drugs, but you really don't want to do that. And especially don't want to do that with the Sinaloa Cartel. It's called a dry conspiracy. but we were adamant that we had to seize drugs in order to move forward with the prosecution.
So when you talk about test loads, you're talking about just seeing if you can get things through certain ports and through certain
Right.
customs.
You have to have
officials,
company A have a history with company B.
Right.
And every month they get a load of pineapples, they get a load of fruit, whatever it is. That's what they were establishing with us. But, again, we never lose sight of the fact that we're law enforcement. We're telling them, hey, 1 or 2's plenty. You're sending it to Spain. It's our responsibility to get it. Any risk is on our end, not yours, even though they'd lose the product. But they were very disciplined, and that's why they're the top. They were the top.
And they were sending actual fruit, correct?
Oh yeah, we fed
loads.
half the country of Spain with pineapples and plantains and everything. But it was frustrating, and you got to remember, the case agent who started this whole case is very inexperienced. He thinks they're going to send, drop them out of planes. They're going to drop kilos out of parachutes, and it's a very, very sophisticated process.
So you're getting shipments of pineapples and bananas or whatever it is, and it's your job to get it into the ports, past the customs officials.
We had to show that. We also had to
the Sinaloa Cartel.
Exactly. We had to show the cartel that we could get it off the ship through customs and into Europe, which we did. I mean, we literally had to drive this junk out of the port. We didn't know if we were being watched.
Right. Of course, you probably were.
So we have to go through the motions. People get frustrated, but I knew going into this that if we were going to do it right, we had to do all of these steps, and it was going to be frustrating and it was going to be long term. But one mistake, this is what people don't get. You make one mistake and 3 years of investigation are out the window.
Okay, so you do 2 or 3. I think it was 4.
I think it was either 4 or 5.
Loads.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that goes well. No glitches.
No, we're establishing the relationship, but as El Jefe in Europe, I'm now bitching to my people, hey, let's get going. So that we're now applying soft pressure to them. Hey, make this happen. There's a big difference between 1 and 2 test loads and 4. Right. You're wasting basically another 6 to 12 months.
And you're doing all this arranging, and
it's complicated. I don't know if you've ever tried to do it. I learned a lot. I can tell you that.
Right. I bet. So, so now we're at like early 2012, and I think everybody at this point is getting ready, expecting the first load of drugs, and everybody's getting a little antsy. Right.
Everybody from the Sinaloa Cartel to the Sicilians to FBI headquarters to Boston.
Yeah.
There was a tremendous amount of pressure. I felt comfortable that we were going to succeed, but you got to understand at that point, I probably had, in the chain of command, 20 bosses above me. And each one of them needs an explanation. Each one of them has to be convinced. So we had to make a critical decision at that point. That's late 2011, early 2012, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
It took me about 3 months, 4 months that I finally went to the case agent and said, listen, you're not going to like this, but we have to tell the Sinaloas that the Italians are walking away. We needed to now turn up the pressure to the point that they either had to provide something or walk away. Because, very simply, no bad guys would stick around that long. So if we continue to just wait, they're going to say, wait a minute, these guys are really cops. Yeah. So that was something that I decided. The case agent was very, very disappointed. But it was the right move, hopefully, at the time.
So basically, we're gonna communicate through our channels that El Viejo is.
We told them straight out, they're gone. and we walked away. We literally, they tried to reach us and we stopped communicating.
Wouldn't pick up the phone. Yeah.
So that was, I think we did that in February or March of 12.
Yeah.
That was and believe me, there was a lot of sleepless nights about that decision. And again, I bark about the FBI when I don't think we're being supported. They supported that decision. They didn't like it, but they left that up to the investigators. I thought it was the right move. I knew it was a gamble. I told him I thought it had an 80% chance of working. In reality, I thought it had about a 20% chance of working, but I didn't tell him that. But there comes a point in a case, every case, where you gotta make something happen, and we had reached that point. So we did that. I believe it was March, and thankfully, and luckily, and hopefully, that kind of lit a fire under their in their jungle, and that leads up to July of 2012. And July of 2012, we get a call out of the blue. Go to Detroit in 24 hours. There's something there for you. We send a team to Detroit. Overnight, the next day, we go to a Mexican restaurant. We meet with the Mexican employees. They take us to a back alley, point to a car. We reach in the car. There's a takeout bag. And when we get back to the hotel, there's a huge amount of heroin and methamphetamine.
And this was totally unexpected.
It wasn't unexpected in the sense that they had to do, we had kind of called their bluff. All right?
Right.
You guys are supposed to be the Sinaloa Cartel. You're supposed to be this and that. You can't even give us a bag of dirt. So again, what cop is going to say to them, we're walking away? All right? So we set that up. And once we got the heroin and the methamphetamine, I knew literally that moment that we were going to get the load that we had hoped for. Right. And literally within, I think it was only 2 or 3 weeks later, at the end of July, finally a ship arrives in Spain, and there's 346 kilos of cocaine. So the mother load finally came in.
Yeah.
It took 3 years.
Yeah, without fronting a dime.
Didn't pay a penny for it.
This was the moment of victory. The FBI had helped facilitate the largest seizure of methamphetamine and heroin in Detroit law enforcement history, which was stuffed in takeout bags and dropped on the front seat of a car. They had also seized 346 kilos of cocaine in Spain. So after 3 years of investigation, the FBI now had illegal drugs supplied by the Sinaloa Cartel in their possession, which after decades of trying finally solidified the legal case against them. So now you've got the drugs, you're talking to Chapo, you've established direct communications with him, and then what happens?
No, you get the dope, you get the product, but the case isn't finished until you get the bodies. So now we have to arrest. All right. So we know we can't go into the mountains of Mexico and grab him, but we can grab all of his people. So we arrange for them to come to Spain again, and we want to have a celebratory party. We finally made our first deal. Drugs are flowing freely through Europe. They're expecting to get paid. I believe they thought we were going to give them $13 million. So it's setting up the arrest. So we work with the Spanish National Police, and we set up the final day. But again, from experience and from what older agents had taught me, we wanted to bleed them dry the last day because we're never going to see these guys again. So rather than just arrest them, we invite them. They think they're going to a huge party. We bring them to the hotel, and then I sit with Manuel. One of the undercovers and myself sat with Manuel for, I believe it was 4 hours. And we literally went through step by step of what had happened in the case, that Chapo made every decision. In the federal system, you have what's called co-conspirator statements. So if Manuel says that Chapo approved all of these, that's evidence that you can use. So it's almost the same as the words coming out of Chapo's mouth. And we had all other kinds of evidence, obviously, but we spent that last day, that was I believe that was August, August of 12.
7th, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
We spent that last day milking him dry of every detail.
And this is all on video, audio tape. Yeah.
To the point that I finally got a message from our team saying, no mas, no more. You got it. I then brought up the European guys, the telephone, the attorney, everybody else. That was one other thing I should point out. I would never talk dirty to anybody other than Manuel. So when I would meet with the lawyer, I would meet with the financial guy, I would meet with the distributor. They never had, and that's the way Chapo would operate. I would only talk to the most trusted person. So that last day, I'm sure they were surprised because here I am telling the whole story. Well, that's a reason. There's a reason, because the Spanish cops are waiting downstairs. All right. So we go through this. It was a long day, but a very productive day. And then at the end of the day, they were all arrested in Madrid.
And then there's another step to this process in terms of as soon as they're arrested, you want to talk to them.
Right. So what happens is they're arrested, and we obviously arrested them in Europe so that Mexico wouldn't know about it right away. But we also know that if they didn't report in by a certain time, that meant there was probably a problem.
Yeah.
So we did start to interview them. We did start to gather intelligence and additional information. But for a series of reasons that still aggravate me, we weren't allowed to pursue that new evidence. We were basically said, you accomplished what you were supposed to, shut it down.
So they were telling you about other links that El Chapo had higher up in the Mexican government. Is that okay to say?
Yes.
Okay.
There's
and
because
you were told, not to pursue that.
We were told that we had achieved our objectives because we were basically a drug case.
Yeah.
And we now seized the drugs. We had arrested them. That we had accomplished our objectives.
Right.
That we were now going down a different path, and that wasn't authorized.
Okay.
It's just the internal workings of the legal system in the FBI. You can speculate if there was other reasons, but again, that we were told that our job was done.
Okay. And they go to trial. They plead.
Everybody pled guilty, except the lawyer. The lawyer is always the smartest guy in the room. Remember, he went to trial. I think it lasted 5 days, and he was convicted on all counts in less than 5 hours.
Okay. So these guys were all put away except for Chapo.
Everybody got arrested. Everyone was convicted. They averaged about 20 to 25 years each. And then Chapo obviously was beyond our grasp at the time. And then he was later obviously captured and extradited to the United States.
Yeah, I think he was grabbed in 2016.
I think it's 2016, correct?
Yeah, January of 2016. Yep. Yeah, and you got the word of that arrest?
The case agent called me or texted me, and it just said, we got him. And he didn't, there was no further explanation needed.
Right. You knew who he met.
When they said we got him, I said, hopefully they'll hold on to him this time because, as we know, he fled a second time before we were able to actually get him for good. And that's another fallacy in TV and films, like the day of the arrest is the last. No, that's just the start of the process. What good is working 3 years if these guys don't go to jail?
What do you know about the raid in Mexico where they finally grab Chapo, were you privy to any of that, or was that just a phone call where you heard they got him? Did you know it was in
I want to be
process?
careful how I present this. I would say that
Okay.
I was not surprised when he was arrested. I knew that they were getting closer and closer. They don't call us up and tell us everything,
Right.
but we're kept
Right.
because we're one of the officers with a prosecution. We knew that they were tightening the noose.
Yeah.
It was clear that Mexico had kind of had its fill of Chapo and was willing to work with the
He was
United States.
becoming a liability.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
it affects,
Yeah.
the State Department, many things outside of the law enforcement arena. The squeeze was being made on Mexico. So, like I said, I didn't know exactly when and where they would get him. It was a vicious shootout. I know that.
Right.
And I give a tremendous amount of credit to the Mexican Marines that went and got him, because it was a nasty situation.
People were killed. And during the
I can't remember. I know bad guys were killed. I don't know if
Yeah.
any good guys were killed. I just don't remember.
Yeah, but the Mexicans basically arrested him themselves.
Yes.
And then
The United States,
we extradited
the
him
United
here.
States and Mexico worked together, but the actual, and again, I would like the same thing if it was on our side. They arrested their own and they handed them over.
And I'm sure we made it very clear to them that we wanted him.
The political pressure exerted on Mexico had to be incredible, but we weren't gonna give up. We weren't gonna stop. So they finally decided it was in their best interest to turn him over.
Right, and then he was extradited here.
He was extradited here. He was put on trial in New York. There were historical cases throughout the United States. Chapo had been a target of the U.S. government for many, many years: Chicago, New York, Houston. So all of the cases, we had the only case that had the simultaneous evidence, the time evidence. All of our evidence was collected and forwarded to Washington, and then it was prosecuted in New York. And he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison in the Supermax.
What a case, huh? And how was that received in the FBI? That must have been a big deal.
Well, it was well received. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
It's interesting from where we started to where we finished. There were some people that never thought it would happen, which I understood. It was a long shot. There were other people who were very supportive, and there were times that we as the investigators would get frustrated, and then we would talk to certain people and they'd say, hey, keep your head down, keep going.
Yeah.
Until they don't answer your phone call, keep going.
Right. It's going well. Yeah.
People don't recognize that's 3 years of work that each time we contact them, it could blow up in our face. So that's like constant pressure for 3 years. And when it was over and done with, I was very proud. And again, I told you I got a lot of accolades, but the people most responsible for that success was the case agent, the informant, and the other 3 undercovers. But don't think that just because Chapo was taken off the streets that they're still a very, very powerful organization. We heard them pretty good back then. They took a hit for a while, but as long as there's a demand for drugs, there'll be cartels. Whether it's Mexico, whether it's Europe, it's just the way it is.
It was never simply a case of seizing El Chapo. In order to lock him away in prison, the FBI had to make a legal case against him. Mike and his team accomplished that over 3 years in a brilliantly planned and executed undercover operation. On August 7th, 2012, Mike and his team had arrested 8 top members of the Sinaloa Cartel. A few days later, the U.S. Justice Department issued an indictment of El Chapo. On January 7th, 2016, El Chapo was arrested in Mexico. Soon after that, he was extradited to the U.S. and put on trial. The evidence against him was incontrovertible. Shortly after the trial, then FBI Director James Comey traveled to Boston to hand awards to Mike and the other FBI agents who had worked the case. When it was Mike's turn to go to the podium, he remembered looking at Director Comey and thinking that the FBI leadership had actually let them down and had shut off their investigations for reasons he didn't understand. In his own words, he thought, "What the fuck does outside the scope of your original objective mean?" That's how Mike's mind works. The case was a huge success, but make no mistake about it, the Sinaloa Cartel continues to smuggle huge amounts of illegal drugs into the United States. Just before El Chapo went to trial, Mike and I met for lunch in Santa Monica, California. As we entered a cafe on 3rd Street, Mike sort of maneuvered to a certain table in the back. He turned to me and said, "Ralph, do you mind if I sit facing the door?" And I said, "No, not at all. Like, why?" And he said, "Well, like I'm a major witness in the case against El Chapo, and they might have some people like looking out for me." I was like, "Oh, okay, Mike. Thanks for letting me know." But that's Mike McGowan. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe. And make sure to tune in to the next episode of Heroes Behind Headlines.